we talk about the lakes and we talk about recreation, and a lot of people go boating or they have cottages or they go to the beaches along the lakes and use them and love them. The lakes are also used for transportation. They are waterways of commerce as well. So let's go ahead and take a listen to a session that ran earlier about multimodal, and that means the transportation of boats and barges along the Great Lakes.
Another reason this is important is this is just a region. It's a mega region. It's a big one, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Basin. But from a transportation standpoint, this region is part of a much grander, larger global transportation system. Continental in this perspective, but very much global. A lot of the iron ore that's coming out of the ground is going to China. Making sure that it can get there cheaply, efficiently, compared to the other providers of iron ore in the world is very important economically. But understanding that this is just a system and coordinating, not just across different jurisdictions, but within the jurisdictions between the environmental guys and the guys that do transportation policy and planning is very critical, because this is very important. Products don't start and stop at the borders of a state or a province or a country. Very often it goes right through. So just to make a few last comments, what does the future hold for this particular region and multimodal and marine transportation in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Basin? Like I said at the top, my crystal ball is no better or worse than anybody else's. Two key points that were made in a recent Transportation Research Board study effectively indicate that the future is virtually impossible to predict, particularly in the longer term. And for those thinking about the multimodal freight transportation system, the Great Lakes, the environment, long-term planning is very difficult to do because long-term forecasting will invariably be wrong. And that's been proven over and over again. What you can do, and what is more practical, and this came out of the work that was done, is to think about future scenarios and start backcasting in terms of what does that mean for us today, and what should we be preparing for in the future. So future scenarios for marine transport in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Basin: more marine transport, things that will generate more marine transport or lead to it being more competitive, $300 a barrel of oil. If rail and truck just become less competitive because of the cost of fuel, the marine mode, which is more fuel efficient, will likely stand to benefit. A natural resource boom, more stuff moving into the system. Land transport capacity limitations. Will that cause a diversion of traffic if reliability on the rail and road network is not quite as good? Things that will lead to less marine transportation include invasive species lockdown. If you could shut down a ballast water type initiative, as was contemplated earlier by New York, would have done had a major impact on marine transport in the Great Lakes. It's a future scenario nonetheless. It could happen. It's something that is being discussed. Water levels drop further. Regulation and fees, death by 1,000 cuts. There are a lot of issues in the marine transportation industry that it's fairly highly regulated, and that can make it difficult to compete. Failure of port and lock infrastructure, and conversion of, just this is another example, coal power plants to nuclear. So there's a lot of coal moving. Well, what if that coal just doesn't move anymore because there's no need for it? It'll ship elsewhere, probably by rail over to the West Coast and on to China and places like that. So what future should we be preparing for? The other question is, what can and can't you actually influence in terms of preparing for the future? So here's a map of the region showing road and rail capacity constraints. And we did a similar map for 30 years down the road, and everything lights up in red. Everything becomes capacity constrained. So a lot of people say, well, why don't we just move some of the traffic that's being moved through this congested area onto the waterway, which has excess capacity. There's tons of additional capacity. The St. Lawrence Seaway itself is at 50% capacity. Well, it's the shippers that make that call. And some traffic may divert if it makes sense from a transit time, logistics cost, reliability standpoint, but a lot of it won't. If you shut down in one way or another marine transportation, then this problem is going to get far worse. Moving a lot more coal on the water, moving on the rail network, moving a lot more on the road network will expedite this problem. So some general conclusions as my last slide. Marine transport is used where it provides competitive supply chain solution for shippers. It's the shipper that decides. Users of marine transport will react, these are the shippers, in one way or another to exogenous factors and future scenarios. If the waterways are shut down, they'll find another way to get their products to market. That may not be good for everybody. That may lead to more congestion, more capacity problems, more emissions from truck and rail transportation. But they'll figure it out. They'll get their products to market if they can competitively, and if they need to move to do that, well, they'll do that too. Policymakers and planners cannot, on their own, promote more marine transportation unless they really develop policies that are in line with the interests of those that make the shipping and routing decisions. Actions that hinder marine transport, directly or indirectly, will have repercussions on regional supply chains and competitiveness. As I said, this is a drive demand that supports the economy. So if you start tinkering with things that affect the ability and competitiveness of the transportation system, then that could hurt the competitiveness of the companies that generate economic activity in these particular regions. So the final point is beware of unintended economic consequences. This is not only a multimodal freight transportation system where there's a lot of different modes and different interests in different jurisdictions, but there's all sorts of other layers. Environment is a very important one as well. And so making sure that all the needs and concerns are appropriately represented in terms of thinking about those future scenarios, I think is absolutely critical, particularly in the context of not making plans that will have, as I said, unintended consequences economically. Transportation is a drive demand. Shippers will continue to make routing decisions irrespective of what the plans are, but what those decisions will lead to in terms of pressures on the system, environment, and the like is really something that needs to be fairly well understood.
And you're watching our coverage of Great Lakes Week right here on greatlakesnow.org. I'm Christy McDonald. We're coming to you live from Cleveland this afternoon as we continue our coverage talking about the health and the well-being